This region is being buffeted by a brutal wave of COVID-19. Part of the reason is this new variant. It's called P1. This variant could be more contagious. It might even be more lethal. All of these graves behind me have been dug since January 9th, all for people who have died of COVID-19. So despite all of those new graves that the government has dug since the beginning of this pandemic, they are running out of space. What's happening in this part of Brazil right now is basically the collapse of the healthcare system. We are here in the city of Iranduba, Brazil. It's a small city that's in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, and we're outside this small hospital, really more of a clinic that has been transformed to only accept COVID patients, because what's happening in this part of Brazil right now is basically the collapse of the healthcare system in the wake of a brutal second wave of COVID-19 that is hitting this region right now. We've only been outside this small hospital for just a few hours, but according to a nurse that we spoke to who was inside, we know that 3 people have already died today of COVID. You know, with things like ventilators, for example, there's none inside. People are struggling to get oxygen. We saw another woman show up here in an ambulance, and when they opened the ambulance doors, the paramedics were giving her CPR. They brought her inside the facility, but ultimately a nurse told us that she too died from COVID-19. We spoke to a woman whose brother is currently inside this facility. He's been in there for weeks. Her life, the past several weeks, has been trying to procure medical supplies, oxygen, really anything, meds, anything that can help her brother get through this, to survive. And she's terrified that her brother might end up over here. Just over my shoulder there, you can see that is basically a mobile morgue. It's a refrigerated container where we know that they are putting the bodies of COVID-19 patients. She's terrified that her brother might end up there. So despite all of those new graves that the government has dug since the beginning of this pandemic, they are running out of space here in the city's main cemetery. And if they're going to have to keep burying people, they have to figure out a new way to do that. And that new way is what's going on behind me here. These are government workers who are building what are so-called vertical graves. And you can kind of see over here how that works. They're basically coffin-sized sections that will stack eventually, one on top of the other until a certain height. The government has started this project. They're going to keep going for the next several months, and what they're saying is that by the end of this project they will have built roughly 22,000 vertical graves to meet the expected demand as this pandemic goes on. Well, right now we are in the city of Manaus, Brazil. It's a city of roughly 2 million people in the middle of the Amazon rainforest in the northwestern part of Brazil. And we came here to the city's largest cemetery, and we specifically came to this section of the cemetery to kind of help illustrate what is happening here. All of these graves behind me, row after row after row, there's more than 300 of them there, have been dug since January 9th, all for people who have died of COVID-19. And as morbid as all of this is, it makes sense based on what we've been seeing on the ground here, because what is happening is that this city, this region is being buffeted by a brutal wave of COVID-19. Back in April and May, that was the first time this area got really hit hard with a COVID-19 wave, and the healthcare system buckled back then. Well, what we're seeing right now is almost worse than that, and people keep asking, well, how are we here again? Part of the reason is this new variant. It's called P1. It was discovered by Japanese researchers, and we've spoken to several epidemiologists who say that this variant could be more contagious. It might even be more lethal. We simply don't know yet. We've seen video from a hospital here in Manaus that shows just horrific scenes. These are patients packed into these hospitals, unsanitary conditions. There is a startling lack of ventilators. There's a startling lack of oxygen. And it just goes to show you how much this city's health system is being crippled. We know that doctors have told us that they've seen more intense cases of COVID-19 than we've seen in the past, but that is certainly something that people in this part of the world are nervous about. This particular variant was just detected in the United States for the first time earlier this week. But it's not just the variant. It is also severe government inaction. The federal government, led by President Jair Bolsonaro, he's a COVID skeptic. He has taken a series of controversial steps, not doing the kinds of things that you would expect the federal government to do. Like after the first wave here in Manaus, you would have expected the federal government to come in here, state officials to come in here and make sure that that wouldn't happen again, that there would be enough ventilators, enough oxygen, enough bed space, enough medicine. That clearly did not happen. It was so egregious that federal investigators are now investigating the health secretary of this country to see if some sort of crime was committed during the course of events that has seen the healthcare system collapse here in Manaus for the second time. That's also a part of this. And I'll just end by saying there was also a feeling here that because of how bad things were right after the first wave, that many people thought that so many people got COVID-19 in this town that herd immunity had been achieved. Well, clearly that is not what happened, because herd immunity wasn't achieved. And now we see scenes like this behind me, hundreds of new graves with hundreds, thousands even, more to come.
The village of Kamikatsu is special, not for its tea fields or idyllic mountains or peaceful historic homes. It's known for something it doesn't have. Kamikatsu, as a town, produces almost no trash. Kamikatsu has a population of roughly 1,500 people, and in the 1990s was doing nearly no recycling.
で上勝町ではもともと田舎なので皆さん家庭から出たゴミはもう自分の庭で焼くとか山にほかすと。
Burning all that garbage created carbon dioxide emissions that became dangerous, and the nature around them was suffering. So a decision was made. Kamikatsu had to change. This was the start of their path towards zero waste and a new way of living.
いわゆるゼロ・ウェイスト宣言というものを町として行って、このゼロ・ウェイストというものを掲げ始めたのは2003年になります。
Effectively, what zero waste here means is that there's no such thing as throwing something in the trash. Everything has to get recycled. And in the beginning, it was difficult for everyone. Like Mr. Takuya Takaichi. He's a shop owner in Kamikatsu.
ゼロウエスト運動が始まってから生活自体はやっぱりある意味ちょっと負担になりましたよね。分別する分と時間と前やってた生活よりはちょっと増えたんで負担にはなってきましたけど。
And Mrs. Hachiya Katayama. She's a housewife.
最初は全部プラもゴミも何も考えずに全部一緒に庭で焼いてたんですが、それが変わって今度分別方式になったら戸惑いがありました。
That classification system she's talking about is the key to Kamikatsu's success, and it is aggressive. There are 45 categories of recyclables.
アルミ缶、スチール缶、スプレー缶、金属製のキャップ、布、木製品、蛍光缶。
The list, it goes on. There's 35 more. Slowly, what was originally this huge burden became a way of life in Kamikatsu. People began looking at trash differently.
物を大事にするという気持ちが逆にできたという。仕入れに行って出るゴミで段ボールがやっぱり多いですね。きれい段ボールはまた再利用して梱包したりするに使いますね。
この町に来るまでは正直全くしてなくて、ゴミは全て一つのゴミ箱に捨てれたので、食べ残しとか基本コンポストに契約している農家さんの畑で堆肥になって、じゃあまたうちが使う野菜にまた変わるっていう、なんかちょっとしたこう循環するサイクルができると、使う側としてもやっぱり意識は変わるし。
It's important to recognize that Kamikatsu is a small town. It is not like New York or London. The rules are not the same, but there is a constant, and that's people. They can change.
はい、ゼロ・ウェイストアカデミー坂野です。 どんな社会問題も一緒だと思ってるんですけれども、取り組んだところでなくならないじゃないかって言ってしまったら終わりなんですよね。でそうやって意識が変わっていくと、巻き込む相手も対象も広がっていくから大きな動きになっていくよねという流れがすごく大事なのかなと思っています。
この町に来てゼロ・ウェイスト知って、で実際にやってみて、なんかこれはこれからやっぱり生きていく上ではすごく大事なことなんじゃないのかなと。料理してる人たち、例えば飲食に関わる人たちが、少し意識を変えれば、やっぱりそもそもの量がやっぱ減ると思うんで。
変なんやけど簡単なことなんやけど、ちょっとも考えて物を捨てるっていう、だからね、物を大事にする気持ちは逆にでいいとね、負担が増えた分、なんか違う部分の心の部分がなんか豊かになった分は確かにあるかな。